a luxury fashion buyer based in New York City with experience working at companies such as Prada, Saint Laurent, Gucci, and Dior. In her current role, she is a buying manager for Chanel Handbags. She's an active member of the Black Employee Resource Group, and she is an FIT alumna, class of 2019, and currently serves on the Alumni Advisory Board. Through her continuous efforts, both professionally and personally, she aims to advance the representation of minority groups in fashion business. Please join me in welcoming Kiana. Thank you. I'll give you a steadier seat.
Okay.
Thank you for being here.
Of course.
Would love to hear about your career path and how where you are now.
Yeah, so thanks for having me, you guys, and thanks for coming. I know it's probably not the most popular time to be in school right after break, but I went to FIT, and so I graduated actually just in 2019, which to me feels like yesterday. You guys are probably like, oh, that's so long ago. But yeah, so I started interning like as soon as I could when I came to FIT. That was really how I got my start. I'm from Atlanta. My parents work in medicine. Like no one had any idea what I was doing when I moved to New York. They were like, you're gonna work in fashion, okay, like what is the school that you're going to? And I was like, don't worry, I'll prove it to you, like I got it. And everyone was just like, okay, and kind of gave me the benefit of the doubt. I moved, I was 16 when I started school and I moved here. And freshman year, first semester, I obviously didn't have an internship because I had just moved here. And I gave myself that semester to like figure something out. I was like, okay, it's fine, like I'll figure it out. Second semester, I found something online. It was unpaid at the time, which is hopefully no longer allowed. And but because it was unpaid, I would go just whenever I could. Like literally whenever I could. I would go from 11 to 1 on Tuesdays. I would go from like 3 to 6 on Wednesdays, just like whenever I could. And it was at a wholesale internship. So I was basically working trade shows and like selling the product to, at the time, like Barney's and different vendors. And from there, one internship kind of led to the next. I just kept really applying. I applied for the first 2 that I ever had. After that, I did an e-commerce internship. And then from there, I got my first luxury internship, which was at Marc Jacobs. Again, all of these roles were not in what I wanted to do, which was buying. Like I majored in fashion business management here. I took whatever internships I could do. The first one was wholesale, which wasn't like that far off. The second one was e-commerce. The one at Marc Jacobs was production, like runway sample production. So I was with design interns. We were like ironing labels and making sure that all the fabrics were the right color. And like I was dyeing things. I told them I had no idea how to do any of it, and I like tried to make sure they knew that. But you know, it was like I got my foot in the door. And then once I had Marc Jacobs on my resume, I was able to do the row and all the other ones that you mentioned. I got a few others. And then so when I graduated, I started as the assistant buyer for men's at Gucci. And then I went to Dior as the women's ready-to-wear associate buyer, and now I'm the handbag buyer.
That's great. Awesome. Well, what's really cool too is you got experience in all these different areas, which you've now taken with you. I mean, you now know that much more about production that you would not have known. And just as I was talking about understanding sales reports, you understand production that much better. It can make you a stronger buyer.
It's so timely. I mean, hopefully you guys are paying attention. I know it's a lot to digest, but I do think it's those reports are like way more in depth than I look at every day, you know, and I do think it makes such a big difference when we work with our cross-functional partners and they're able to understand like what we're talking about, and the same, you know, goes both ways. So again, like my experience working in different product categories, working in, you know, at different brands and also on different sides of the industry, I think really was a strength of mine when I was talking to these companies at each like future job, because I could understand the start to finish process of really like how the garment goes from design to being made.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Being sold, sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Well, tell us about your current role and what, you know, kind of what your main job is and kind of what a typical week might look like.
Yeah. So right now I manage the way the handbag category is managed at Chanel. It's different at every company, but we really work as a small team together on buying these handbags for the US, right? So what that means when you're a buyer, if you guys aren't familiar, is really, well, does everyone know what a buyer does? Okay, so I'll just tell you more specifically what I do then. Does anyone want to be a buyer?
I actually applied for like an internship in buying, kind of like on impulse, but I have no idea what to expect.
Okay, cool. All right, what does everyone else kind of want to do, roughly? I know you're saying some design people, right?
Raise your hand if you're design.
Okay, okay, so a lot of design people. Well, it's good to know. So let me know if this goes too left. But basically, buying, we get there right after the design stage, right? So the designers make the garments. In this case, it happens in Paris. They design the garments. We travel. We go to see them, and we get to view the collection. They present to us, the design team or a representative from the design team will present to us the vision of the collection. And it's really grandiose. Like usually they have a whole production team, like lights, camera, action. Like it's like we're there at our own unique little show. It's not the show that's for press. It's like a separate time right after. And whoever from the design team will come. Sometimes it's the creative director of the brand itself. That's happened at different companies I've worked at. Other times it's like the head of design or whatever. And they'll come out and they'll walk you through like this 3-day presentation of the collection. They'll tell you everything you need to know, like what the inspiration was, where the fabric came from, everything like that. And then our job as buyers is to go in and to say like, how many do we think we can sell of what you've made, right? So if you just you design samples, right? So like there's only 1 or 2 of everything in the showroom. You're not just gonna someone has to tell you how much to make, right? If you work for yourself, maybe you're telling yourself, but that's really the buyer's job, is to figure out how much of what's designed can be sold and how much money you need to buy those things to sell them, right? And that's where the term buyer comes from. A lot of people think of it as like shopping, like when you go shopping, you're buying. We're shopping from the designers, right? So I have to request a certain amount of money to go shopping, right? So like I have to go to planning team, go to the finance team, propose a budget based on how much we sold last year, how much we think we can sell this year. Once I get that budget approved, then I go to the showroom and I say, what do I want to spend this on? Maybe I really like the blue bag you designed. Maybe I really like the crossbody bag you designed. Maybe I really hate this other bag you designed. There's so much that's offered that you don't have to buy. That's why everything that's like walks the show doesn't end up in the store. And usually when you work for a brand, the buyers represent a region. So I buy for the United States, there's buyers for China, there's buyers for Southeast Asia, there's buyers for the Middle East, buyers for Europe. So we all kind of are responsible for understanding our market and knowing what from the collection we want to buy as a representation of like our region, and within that the different stores. So really like knowing the difference between what Hawaii needs versus what New York needs, and even within New York, knowing the difference between what Soho needs versus what 57th Street needs, because that's totally different in and of itself.
Yeah. Great, and I think that was an awesome answer and probably much more thorough than anyone's described their job for the semester. The designers are typically much more creative and artistic and coming up with the top line vision of what they see, whereas the buyer is still a bit creative because they need to understand, they need to be watching the crowds, they need to be watching their customer base and understanding, where they can push the envelope and where they need to pull back. And to your point, like which stores and which locations can be better, but at the same time, they also need to be super analytical and be able to understand the numbers. So
yeah,
I feel like it's like a 50-50 split in my head.
Yeah, it's even maybe like 70-30, like 70 analytical, 30 creative, just because what I described is let's say half the job, and then the other half of the time, right? Like you have to make sure what you bought 6 months ago sells. So I'm either in market, which is buying a new collection for the future, or I'm not in market, in which case I have to make sure that what's selling on the floor is actually selling, right? Because I bought that. So I decided that New York, Soho needs 10 of this like blue tote, and they're selling none of them. That was literally my decision. So I have to, so that's really not a good look. There's a lot of things that go into that, right? There's visual merchandising, there's marketing, PR, who's wearing this? Like, what is the trend right now? Is the economy crashing? Was there a storm last week? Like, there's so many things that could be going into it, but at the end of the day, the reason why those units are there is because the buyer ordered them. So it's really then our job, when we're not buying the upcoming collection, the rest of our job is to work with whoever possible to make sure that that stuff sells. So I have meetings with training, I have meetings with visual merchandising, I have meetings with all these people to make sure they're prioritizing the styles that we need to prioritize, right? So I can go to visual merchandising and say, hey, can you guys swap the mannequins in your region, right? Like, I'm not doing it on a granular level, but if I talk to the Northeast visual merchandising director, I can say like, hey, do you think you guys can prioritize this style this month in your rotation for the windows? Maybe that'll get more of them sold. Or I can go to the PR manager and say, hey, do you guys think the next celebrity you send it back to, it can be this one instead of the other one that you had planned? Things like that.
Great, that's awesome, thank you. What's the team look like in your office?
Yeah, so in general, I think that merchandising teams are structured by product category, or I know that merchandising teams are structured by product category. So I'm over Handbags at Chanel, but at Dior I was over women's ready-to-wear. You know, they're broken out by product category usually, and then within a product category you have like a hierarchy of people in the team. So you have like an entry-level person, an entry-level role, maybe a manager, a senior manager, and a director is like a rough estimate of kind of how most companies structure their teams. Some are bigger, some are smaller. Usually if you work for a contemporary brand or if you're designing for a contemporary brand, you might have one buyer for like every category. Or for all of women's, one team for all of women's, one team for all of men's. Typically the larger the company, the more granular the categories get. And I think it's the same with design, where like you might, at a smaller brand, you're gonna design maybe more categories, whereas at a bigger company, you might literally get as granular as a specific product category within a category. Like I interned at Macy's, and I was in product development over women's cashmere sweaters. Like so specific. They told me that, and I was like, okay. I don't know. Like it was so granular. There was a team for like women's fashion sweaters. So they separated the sweaters because cashmere sweaters alone was $300 million business a year. And so it's just that like the scale determines kind of the categories. But within the team, it's like I would say your typical hierarchy.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then, so for someone like Anushka who's thinking about applying to an entry-level buying job, what does an entry-level job look like?
Yeah, so internships are like the most entry level, right? Like most of these companies have interns. Obviously, they're super limited, and there's a gazillion million people who want them. So it really comes to your experience, like prior to, especially at a luxury brand, I would say, like your experience prior to working there. You know, making sure. For us, like we have an advantage by an FIT. Like our classes are experience. Like don't discount that. You're learning things in class that anybody else who's studying anything else has not learned, right? So if something says years of experience, like your years studying that is experience. Like that's how I approached it. You know, you have real world training in these classes. But with that being said, it's like, you know, that's kind of the first step. And then after that, the entry-level roles are usually like coordinators or specialists, assistant level buyers, and really we all do the same thing. I mean, when I was an assistant buyer, it's just a level of responsibility that changes, right? So as an assistant buyer, I wasn't privy to as much decision-making per se, but I was still contributing, I was still you know, figuring out more of the trend aspect. It honestly is a little bit more creative at the entry level because you have less weight on your shoulders about the actual trend of the business, right? Your manager is going to be responsible for if those 5 totes aren't selling. You're really responsible for choosing those bags and like why we're choosing those. So I would do a lot of competitive analyses, a lot of trend reports, a lot of like understanding the market, what were our other brands doing and what price were their items at and how did that reflect on our product, and really just kind of making sure the person above you has as much information as possible going into the buy, right? Because ultimately the weight is going to be on their shoulders, so you just want to support them with as much information as you can. Because you're only one person, they're very small teams. Even now, like the specialist on our team, if she doesn't tell me like half the things that she tells me, I'm like running around with my head cut off. So it's really just as flexible as you can be and as hands-on. But everyone is involved in every stage. It's just like how much responsibility you have.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. What do you feel like stands out to you when you've had to hire someone?
Yeah. So I think it's interesting, like learning from what people ask you when you get hired, and then like how do you want to do it differently. I think it's like anything in life, but I used to get asked all these crazy questions, and then I used to think, you know, like Stanford Prison Experiment vibes, like, oh, like I can't wait until I can like grill someone in an interview, you know, like use my power. And then I was like, that's really just not cool. So now I feel like I'm very chill, but I mostly, honestly, this industry, it's a little bit different design, right? You guys are more talent driven. This fashion business, like, yes, baseline intelligence, understanding numbers and math sense, but you can learn on the job, right? All of these things you can learn on the job. Don't get intimidated by a job description. Don't get intimidated by the company. I look around every day and I'm like, if they can do it, I can do it. Like that's like my baseline. Like if someone else is doing this, like how did they figure that out? I literally went to school for this. I should be able to figure it out, right? So I think that when I'm interviewing, it's really just about personality and kind of like motivation, efficiency, those types of things, because at the end of the day, if you're a person who can learn quickly, like you'll figure out the actual tasks. It's more so about how do you present yourself. I think public speaking is a really big one. I feel like one of my greatest strengths is really my ability to speak to people. So hopefully this is entertaining. But it helps at work a lot because I'm able to network internally with so many different teams and really be like, I was saying so much of my job is really working with those different teams, right, to problem solve. If I'm afraid to talk to those people, that's not really helpful in the job. And so on our team, like we really want people who are also able to kind of like bridge those gaps for us. And it's actually really interesting because at Chanel we all have different like passion points and passion teams that we partner with. And like mine is the style expertise team and the retail teams because I just love product. But like my boss, for example, her main touch points are client analytics, which is the team that's dedicated to understanding who's buying what. They do all this data around clients. And so she works primarily with that team, I work primarily with other teams. If you have someone who's not good at talking to anyone, that's not really like a strong suit and I would say like most roles, but I think that understanding your strengths is really important. And so if that can come across in an interview, then that's like what I look for. It's less about like the text.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I like that. You obviously haven't always worked in handbags. Wonder if you could share a little bit about the differences between ready-to-wear handbags or any of the internships you saw.
Yeah, so I've been in handbags for 6 months now. Everything before that was ready-to-wear, and I did men's and women's. I love clothes, right? Like clothing that's where my love for fashion started. I think that's where most people's love for fashion starts. I mean, definitely there are some handbag, like diehard fans and shoes people. But I was always like, what am I wearing? That was what that was what inspired me. When you look at runway shows, the majority of a runway show is clothing, right? So you're looking at like the trends when you're talking about that. It's usually you're talking about clothes, and so as a kid, that's like just what I understood to be fashion. That's always kind of what I gravitated toward. Now, when you're buying clothes, it's definitely the hardest category, right? Because things come as a look. So a handbag you can just buy and move on. A look for ready to wear, you need the top, you need the matching skirt, you need the jacket, sometimes you need the underpinning, then you need like the third layer of the jacket, and you have to make sure everything comes, and then on top of that it's all size, right? Which also falls into buying when you're buying a size category. So I have to make sure that Soho, if I'm doing their buy, not only do I have to pick which looks they're getting, but then I have to pick what sizes they're getting. And then it's like if they sell one size of the top that went with that look, and now they don't have the top anymore, where do I get the top of the same size to give it back? It's very intricate. With that being said, it's the most fun to buy, because when you go to the showrooms, you get the everyone gets their own categories presentation, right? Like you want the ready to wear presentation. Like that's the fun one. So, and you get to touch the clothes, and the models are coming to try it on. And at Dior, it was amazing. I mean, like Dior Ready to Wear was incredible, and they'd have the models come, and you'd be able to like alter the hems on the spot. They'd have the tailors there. Like it was really cool. None of that is happening in handbags. We're not fixing bags in the middle of the showroom. Like the bag is completely made, and so it's different. But at the same point, handbags are the business driver. We sell way more handbags than clothes. Most companies are that way. Where handbags, the speed of business is much bigger. So if you want to contribute to a larger volume industry, be responsible for more money, understand kind of like the macro trends of the business, accessories is the place to be. If you want to be more involved in like the romancing of a collection and really tied to the client, ready to wear is the way to go.
What do you feel like are some of the biggest trends that are happening in handbags right now?
It's so interesting to me because when I read that question, I thought it was funny because we were just talking about global trends and how, like I said, like we're the buyers for the U.S. And when we go to market, and sometimes we talk to the buyers from the other regions, right? And to me, that's the most eventful because you get to understand how your market compares, right? Because our clients travel all around the world, right? So the client in Soho knows exactly what is offered, not every client, but our top clients know what's also offered in Japan and what's also offered in Paris. And, we don't always have that visibility into what the other markets are buying. And so it's interesting when we talk to them to understand like the trends. And for the US, they always tease us about certain trends. They always say, which I think is funny, in luxury, they're always like, oh, the US, your woman loves to work. And like, I guess in other regions, women don't, the women shopping luxury are usually not going to work. They're usually not buying a $23,000 handbag and then going to the office, right? Like that's very specific to the United States. And a lot of our clients are lawyers, they do lots of different things, and they still are buying these expensive handbags. So with that being said, our clients typically like their bags to fit laptops. They like the shoulder straps to be comfortable. They like things to be crossbody because it's functional when they're like on the go. Whereas East Asia market, they typically want like micro bags, and they don't care if it holds literally anything because they're not going anywhere except for out to party. And it's a massive generalization, but these are the trends you have to be able to kind of like pull out because buyers, you do have to generalize based on your region. And so understanding like your customer is really the start of that, right? So for me, it's like things like that, or they tease the US that our clients love denim. They're like, why so much denim for the US? And we're like, I don't know, people love it. But I think currently, like right now, the main thing I've kind of been noticing is this material development trend, I guess is the trend, or just kind of like the direction we're moving in, where I feel like a lot of the new it bags are just like the same bags we see, but just like made of something different. So like that Caperni bag that was glass or whatever, or you know, like the mushroom leather bags that are now coming out. Or I just feel like people are really experimenting with what the bags are made of, because we really don't have much more to go in terms of the shape of the bag. So you can only do so much with that.
Yeah.
And then I also think what's really interesting, I don't know if you guys saw or read about what's happening with Telfar and how the pricing model that they're trying, but I think there's a lot of innovation happening right now around the way that products are sold and the structure at which they're priced. And I think that's like a really hot topic a lot of times. And I think, so what Telfar is doing, if you're not familiar, is they're launching a test pricing strategy where this is just from me reading on the internet, but they're launching the strategy where an item's gonna be offered online, and the more it sells, the more expensive it gets. So if you buy it first, it's cheaper. And then as demand grows, the price goes up. And it's super interesting because obviously typically it goes the other way around. Something, the longer it's on a shelf, the cheaper it gets discounted, whatever. This is kind of saying like you're rewarded for being a loyal customer and for getting there first. And if you kind of like are late to the game, it's going to be more expensive, which is typically how the resale market works anyways. So they're kind of just like cashing in on their own resale market. Super, super interesting. Things like that to me are like catch my eye when I kind of like read it.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, that's very interesting. You studied at Polimoda when you were here?
Yes.
Want to tell us about that experience?
Yeah.
In Italy?
I loved it. Oh my gosh. I want to go back like tomorrow. So I studied around Florence. It was so amazing. If you guys have the opportunity to study abroad, definitely. Obviously it's, you know, such a privilege to have gotten to go over there, but Polimoda is beautiful, first of all. It's like a palace, literally. So you're in class and like imagine this, except the ceiling is a mural that was painted in like the 1500s. So it's really beautiful. Florence is an amazing city, and then also you get to learn a lot of history, which I think like if you're an art history person, if you're like a fashion nerd, Florence is the place to go. If you're more of like I just want to be working and do whatever, like maybe go to Paris, go to Rome, but Florence is breathtaking and it's beautiful and there's so much history there. Almost all of the Italian brands, even some French brands too, that specialize in leather making, all of their factories are right outside of Florence. And we had professors who used to work at them or, you know, have connections. We would tour. I toured the Gucci factory like in my second week there, I think, and it was just incredible to see like all of these things being made. The culture around the artisans is really rich. And so you get to, on top of that, like art history class there, you're learning all of these things that inspire so many designers and so many of these things that come up in fashion or based in art. And learning that was a lot of great perspective again for me as like a business person. You know, we don't have a lot of opportunities to kind of immerse ourselves in the art side of things. So I absolutely loved it. I was there for only a semester, some people did a year, but I highly recommend Florence, and it's like literally the exact opposite of New York City. So like I was like, I'm from Atlanta, I only ever wanted to live in New York, like that was it. I was a big city person all the way. So going to Florence was really scary because I was like, what am I gonna do? Like, where am I gonna party? I don't know what I'm gonna do. And it was the best thing I ever did. I mean, it was so fun. And you buy groceries every single day because they don't have preservatives in their food, so it doesn't last long. So every day you go to the grocery store, you get your bottled wine, pasta, and whatever vegetable. It's the same thing every day. You make it like in the hall with your friends. And anyways, it was great.
That's awesome.
Not very constructive.
Yeah. Well, sounds like a cool experience. And also, you know, between that and your internships, is there anything else that you highly recommend that students take advantage of here at FIT?
Yeah. I definitely was so involved on campus. Like my friends make fun of me because I'm like here all the time. Like I come here all the time when I miss it. Like I talk to students all the time, so definitely reach out. But I do this because I loved FIT and I feel like I maximized it. And my friends will always say, they're like, oh, Kiana was like Miss FIT, because like I said, when I moved here, no one understood what I was doing, which I feel like happens for a lot of us, you know, and I had to prove to myself, but also to everyone that like I was gonna get something out of this experience. And I think that FIT is such a place where you get out what you put in. And to me, it doesn't make sense to go here and like half-ass it, right? Like because you could go somewhere else, like go to a community college, go to a normal college, go study like liberal arts, something, you know, you're choosing to go here. This is a career-driven school. This is a school that's based on, you know, what you're gonna do when you graduate. And so it really makes sense to be engaged when you're here and to figure out on campus all the resources you have. So from day one, I was like in people's offices. I was, after every class I took, if I enjoyed it, I would keep in touch with the professor, send them an email once a semester with my updated resume and what I was doing. The way I got my job after I graduated college at Gucci literally was because, I don't know if you guys know Vince Kwan, but he's a professor,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. I had his class freshman year, second semester freshman year, I'll never forget. I literally had class. I send him an email update every single semester, just like at the end of the semester, being like, hey, like, it's me. Remember me from your class freshman year, like it was so great all that time ago. This is what I'm doing now. Like, I hope your summer goes well, whatever, right? Like, and send them an update. Not asking for anything, just updating them. And then my senior year, second semester, I was interning at St. Laurent. He knew that because I had sent him the update. And he was like, oh, I'm taking my freshmen to tour the Gucci offices for like career day. A, we never had that, and I was really confused. I was like, what? We went to like some random store. And then B, I was like, of course. So he reached out to me because he knew I was working in luxury or whatever. And I went with his class of all freshmen who were looking for internships and not even, to Gucci. I was working at St. Laurent, which is owned by the same company. And I was the only one there like qualified to actually get a job because it was a class of freshmen. So it wasn't like I was even trying to steal anyone's thunder. They literally were 12. So I was like, okay, so I go in with like all this experience. We're talking, and you know, at the end there's like the HR person's there. You know, I recognized some people in the office, and I went up to the HR person and I said, you know, this was lovely. Like, I would love to share my information. She was like, oh, like I was under the impression like you guys were French. I was like, I'm actually ready for hire. I'm graduating in 1 month. Here's my resume. I already had a different job lined up. I was all set to graduate, and I had an interview the next week. Like literally from my professor from freshman year. Like if you aren't maximizing on these things, like you're wasting your time. And aside from just your professors who are incredible resources, the clubs here, the ability to show leadership, like all of those things are important, and the school gives you opportunities to do that. So like I was in clubs, I had things to speak to in an interview, right, to show my passions. And if you don't feel like there's something that aligns with that, make it, right? Like just create those opportunities, because you're never going to be in this bubble again. Like once you get out into the real world, it's going to be very much like tough love. And I think here is a place where you get to say like, oh, I'm passionate about this, so I feel like using someone else's money to do it, right? Like create a club, ask FIT for some money and do something, or join one that already exists. But I think that was like my biggest win in college, was befriending. I had so many film majors friends, and I had like friends in graphic design, and I'd be like, guys, I feel like I wanted to make a magazine. I literally did nothing. Like I didn't have any of the talent that was required. So I went and I got my friends who were photographers to do the shoot. I had my journalism friends like write some articles for it, and we had the modeling club, like the girls come model for it. Like it was so fun. Never again am I gonna get able to do that like without funding it. So I think
That's awesome. That's a great story. And that's every time I've ever asked anyone how they got their first job, I feel like I like that one. That's awesome. What do you feel like are some of the, I talked to you about what you feel like the biggest trends are from like a fashion perspective, but what do you feel like the biggest challenges are that are facing this industry?
Yeah, so much. The economy being the main one at the current moment. But I think that in general, like the challenges facing this industry are the same challenges facing any industry, which is like tech, automation, is impacting jobs. And jobs are changing pretty rapidly. And even buying jobs, if I were to start buying today, it would be very different than when I started. When I started, I have a very different life than my mentors who have been doing this for like 20 years. They were sitting front row at fashion shows. They were like the, very front and center. Now that's very much shifted. Buyers are very behind the scenes. In 10 years, like who knows what buyers are going to be doing. There's new roles also though that never existed before. There's roles that really merge digital advancements with strategy and things like that. So it's you give and you take, but I think a challenge is definitely how like our roles evolve within that and how we stay relevant in terms of our skill set and like what we can do, because it's really pressing.
Yeah.
If anyone knows, let me know.
To that end, what do you think, how important do you think sustainability is in the whole scheme of things in fashion right now?
Yeah, I mean, definitely really important. I think that that's another thing, obviously, that's been happening, I would say, for the past like 10 years now, where companies are really focused on, both legally and just morally, like how their footprint is impacting the industry. I think for me, what I am super passionate about is kind of the sustainability of like business models. And I think that one trend that is sadly keep happening is these new designers, right? They're not making it very far. Like these new contemporary or even luxury designers make it like 3 years before they close, right? And it's because you're constantly fundraising. The reason we have fashion houses is because they're founded by billionaires, right? Like they had money, speaking very generally, they were sitting on money, and they didn't have to fundraise every time they had to make a collection, every time they had a runway show, right? Like they had money behind it. New designers, every single time you want to make a collection, you need money. Every single time you have a runway show, you need money. And I think there's got to be a new business model to support like new designers.
Ventures like that.
Yeah, exactly. Because otherwise, we're going to be left constantly with this cycle of new business fails, and everyone has to buy from these conglomerates. And then what happens is the conglomerates buy the only successful new companies, right? Which is great for the new company if they wanted to make money, but also like then we just end up buying the same thing, and that's not really like fashion, right? That's usually just whatever that one company wants to do. Even I just saw, I think it was Aesop got acquired by, L'Oreal, and it's like obviously that's not like super fashion. It's whatever, but even that, it's like, God forbid Aesop wanted to do something creative, and then now it's like just gonna be L'Oreal, and we already have L'Oreal products, like, you know what I mean? Like Aesop was in its own lane, and it's the same thing as happening with fashion brands, right? Like there's a creative brand, it does well, and then it gets bought by a bigger company that morphs it into its own company. And so I think, sorry, that was a long-winded answer, but I think it's super interesting.
I agree with all that. It's really an interesting way of thinking about things, and definitely a challenge that we're seeing. It's so easy, the cost of entry is so much lower than it ever used to be, and so all these brands can get started a lot more easily, but I think the scaling is where a lot of companies stall out.
Yeah, 100%. And that's why it's really interesting. And I think it's e-commerce that makes the cost of entry low. You don't have to have a store anymore to sell your things. Anyone can just sell them online.
Totally.
But I think to your point about actual sustainability in terms of like how green things are, I think is really top of mind for a lot of companies. And those are a lot of the new roles that are being created. And I think if anyone has, that type of interest or skill set, I think that's really what a lot of companies are looking for right now, is kind of someone to lead the charge on that. But I know someone who went to FIT with me, and she started a company where the materials, creating fibers from algae, and she's now a multi-millionaire. So. That's
pretty
an
awesome.
inspiration.
Yeah, for sure. Do you travel much in your current role, or in your previous?
Yeah, so we typically go to Paris 6 times a year to view those collections. It was the same at my past roles. Gucci was Milan because it was Italian. We also travel a lot domestically, right? Like the U.S. is a big region. At Dior, it was all of North and South America. Gucci was all of North America, so we would also travel to Canada, things like that. And we have to know there's over 80 stores within the U.S. alone that sell handbags. I personally have not been to all of them, so it's like, how am I supposed to buy it? Obviously, we call them, we talk to them, but the idea is that we have physically been to them, right? So, and we can see and we can understand the trends of the area. A lot of them are obviously grouped together. We probably have like 10 stores in California, right? So that's covered by one trip to California. You can see that whole market. Or like you can go to the southeast. We probably have like 12 stores in Florida, right? So traveling domestically is a priority for buyers to make sure that we are able to accurately speak to what's happening in the country. Obviously, again, we talk to the stores every day, but being able to see the consumer trends in the different areas is really important. And the bigger region you cover, the farther you can travel. Yeah.
So you've taken a passionate lead at Chanel and elsewhere on inclusivity and diversity, and wondering how you got yourself involved with that, and what you think people can do to give a better voice.
Yeah. Well, for me, it came out of need, right? Like, I started working in luxury and realized very quickly that there were very few Black people who worked with me, and that I was the super rare case in terms of how I got my jobs, right? Like, the amount of effort I put into things was unbelievable. Like, I was doing the absolute most, and I ended up here, which is great. But I shouldn't have, not that you shouldn't have to do that, but other people weren't doing as much, right? And that became very evident. I was surrounded by people who kind of, maybe had connections that landed them there or whatnot, didn't have any background or maybe any other experience. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, this was really like a rarity for me to end up here. When for some of these people, it's just like Tuesday. And I was just really, it was weighing on me. And I think I started to think about why that was and how we could change it, how I could change it. And I think part of what kind of set that my viewpoint apart was just that I didn't have to wait to change it, right? And I think that from day one, I was an assistant buyer. I was like trying to get all my friends hired. Everyone was like, "Oh my gosh, you're whipping." She was like, "Yeah, don't worry, girl. Internal portal." I was like, "What's a job?" I was like, "Let's go." And I think that's how it started. Was I once I had access to these rooms and to these platforms, I wanted other people in there with me, and I would send, and it was like I had a great caliber of friends to choose from because I went to school where everyone wanted to do the same thing, right? So most of the people I knew wanted to work in the industry, and like I said, I'm very chatty, so I talk to a lot of people and I meet a lot of people, and so I realized that my network was really large and that I had now this access to a part of the industry that is typically very exclusive and not very diverse. And so that's really how it started, and I started working with Gucci's HR team and kind of talent pipeline development, and then everywhere I went, I made it a priority. And so now I do events like on the side where I just like connect different students and young professionals to people within all luxury brands because my network just keeps growing, and I just want to expand that as much as possible. And I think with that is also the resources that get expanded. And I think that so much of that ease to the role, right, is about the resources you had to help get you there. Obviously, fashion school is a big one that not a lot of people have, right? So I got involved with FIT, started raising more awareness in different communities, even like as early as middle school, to like understanding what these jobs are, so that people can want to go to fashion school, right? Like if no one told you about this job, then why would you have ever gone to fashion school, right? And then from there, it's like, okay, you're at fashion school. Now, do you have the resources you need to be in the spaces needed to actually get a job at a luxury brand? For most people, that's not the case. So it's like, okay, now how do we blow up that like room, right? And break down those walls. And so these are the competitions I have at work now, and like with a lot of different organizations about how to kind of really diversify the talent pipeline development. And from that perspective, that's a lot bigger than race, right? Like, because I think that for me, I was realizing that I was like checking a lot of boxes for people. And yes, I was Black, but I also went to fashion school. I had a million internships. Like, I did all the things I was supposed to do, right? And that was really hard. And it's like, not everyone's gonna have that. Not everyone has the resources to be able to work for free. You know, not everyone has the time. And so you shouldn't have to do all of those things to get one entry level job, right? So it's kind of about like, okay, beyond me, like what about for the person who couldn't do all those things but is equally as talented, equally as intelligent? How can we hire them?
Yeah. That's great. Do you want to talk a little bit about the event that you were here for in February for FIT? I don't know if everyone in the room is aware of it.
Yeah.
They should be.
We had a Black History Month event here that was led by Mackenzie Harding, I think is her name. She's a student here. But basically the goal was to, and typically the goal of all of my events is really to showcase leaders who are more behind the scenes. I think a lot of times now we see like in the media and the press, like diversifying models, diversifying designers, the creative directors themselves being diverse. But you don't see a lot about like the people who fill the offices, which is like where I work, right? So it's like, okay, great, like you have one, like if the creative director is Black or, you know, a minority, that's amazing, but like literally zero impact on like my life whatsoever, right? So I'm just like, for me, there's a lot of other focuses. So I think that it's important to show representation in leadership. And even at Chanel, like we have so many incredible leaders who don't have like social media platforms, and they're not the designers of the company, right? So they're not like on the public facing side. So I try to gather them and show them to people. I literally am like, here you go. This is like representation, right? Because I think that representation is really, you know, tale of the whole time. If you don't see it, you can't be it.
Yeah.
I think can't is a strong word. You know, we end up here anyways. But I think that it's easier if you can see it. And so we had the event for Black History Month, really just like gathering some incredible leaders in the industry and kind of talking about our experiences, our struggles, but also our wins. And just like, again, showing people all of these different roles you can do. On that panel, we had one of my friends, she's the head of PR at Louis Vuitton. Another one is the executive assistant for Dapper Dan. Does like basically everything for his brand in Harlem. And I'm trying to remember who else we had Marielle Bobo is the editor-in-chief of Ebony magazine. So yeah, it's an incredible panel.
That's great. That's really awesome. We had a speaker in earlier in the semester from the 50% Pledge, which was
Was it Aurora? Or?
No, it was not. It was not the founder. She had just joined actually, but so she was actually kind of really getting herself immersed in the whole culture and everything. But it's not only, it's not only great for career paths for people, but I also think it's better for business if you have the right representation throughout the room purchasing for a grander part of the population. And I think that that's what they're trying to work towards as well for their mission and getting people to sign on this pledge. So
Yeah, it's so powerful when you think about like what I described that a buyer does, right? Like I'm buying for the region, for the entire region. If you have a room, and we're a team, and everyone on the team has the exact same background, then are you really buying for the region, or you're buying for where all 6 of those people came from, right? And I'm not claiming to be a source of all-knowing. I mean, that is our job. But in theory, right, like I know more about where I'm from than where I'm not from. Like I'm from Atlanta. Everyone knows that like whenever we talk about does Atlanta need something, it's like I'm from there, I grew up there, like I can speak to that trend better. I can speak to the New York trend better than I can the trend in Chicago. Like
Right.
It's just, no matter how many times I go to Chicago, I'm gonna be able to speak better about where I've lived, right? And if everyone with purchasing power has the same source of reference, then you end up with a very limited representation of product.
totally.
And when you think about clothing, especially, handbags, it's not as big into play because it's like anyone can like any handbag. But I think when you think about clothes in particular, when you think about sizing, when you think about fit, if you have all one type of person deciding what type of clothes should be sold at one of the biggest, brands in the country, you end up with very specific items and very specific fits and very specific sizes. And I mean, even when I was at Dior, some of our team members like refused to buy certain sizes. And you don't realize the power that like one person has in a company. But like if you're there in that role and you don't want to buy that size, technically there's something stopping you. And so you could end up with years where there a certain size isn't offered.
Yeah. And that's a whole bunch of people who just never are represented.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it's really, and I think it's what's really powerful now about my role is I'm like, a Black woman is deciding what handbags are sold at one of the highest end like luxury retailers in the entire U.S. And I think that's really powerful. And being able to say that and stand by that, I think is really important to be able to put that on a platform. Just because it's like people think that no one chooses that stuff, right? Like people think it's the designers designing it and it goes on the shelf. Like someone had to pick it for you. I told you that you were gonna like that. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's really, and all of us, like buyers in general, designers, like we're the ones telling people what they like, right? Like we're giving them trends, we're handing it to them like in a pretty package. So it's just really powerful to be like behind that. But it's also so important that there's different types of people doing that.
Yeah. Well, we as a class kind of put together 4 capstone questions that we wanted to ask every guest this semester. And our first is, what advice would you have for yourself as a young graduate?
Advice for myself as a young graduate. I think really the advice I needed that I should have taken was about like staying true to yourself. I mean, it sounds super cliche, but I think for me, especially with everything I just talked about kind of the landscape of working in fashion business and fashion in general, even being a student here, right? Like it's a predominantly white institution, and I think that you often like can fall into patterns. And again, it's more than race, it's about like a specific type of people, right? Like an economic background and different things like that. But it's like when you fall outside of that, how do you stay true to kind of what's important to you? And as you move through the industry, as you move through these spaces, like how do you keep what's important to you front and center? And I think it's so easy to lose that trying to impress the people you need to impress, right? Like you have a boss, you're gonna have someone hiring you, you're gonna have teachers, you're gonna have all these things, classmates that you think could get you, there's gonna be all these ways to kind of use people, use things, and that's life, that's totally normal. But I think that at the same point, I wish I would have told myself it's never too early to set boundaries and to kind of like keep those things front and center, because obviously I got to a great place in the end, but it was a battle in a lot of ways, and I think that it could have been a smoother journey had I prioritized, my own, like some of my own morals more earlier. And I think that, that's the beauty of this generation, is that we can empower ourselves, and there are so many different ways to get to from point A to point B now, that we don't have to like do it the same way. And I think age is also a big factor in there also. Like, I'm probably 10 years younger than most of my peers, right? So it's like a lot of times I manage people older than me, and a lot of times my bosses are like very close in age to me, they're very far in age from me, and a lot of times they like to, try to micromanage your career path. And that'll happen. Like, the younger you are, a lot of times people want you to go through the same steps they went through. It's just like, you gotta keep your eye on the prize, and like keep your values really front and center, and just kind of like stay true to them.
That's great. Second is, what is the most important thing you learned in your first job?
Say it one more time.
What's the most important thing you learned on your first job?
Ooh. Do the job they hired you to do. Like, I kid you not, like, I wish I could go back and tell myself that, because I just embarrassed myself. But it's fine. I'm an overachiever. Like, I do too much most of the time. And like, sometimes you just need to do what you were hired to do. And I think like I went in so eager, and I was just like, I was coming from Saint Laurent, which we used all the same systems because it was the same, owner. And so I went into Gucci, I was like, yeah, no worries, like, don't even need training on that. Like, I already know how to do that, which I did. But like, then I just went and like created all these other tasks for myself, and I was like, oh, here's like a project on this, here's like this thing. And I remember my boss being so confused. He was like, what are you doing? And I was just like missing things in what I was supposed to be doing, because I was like busy doing random things that was not my job. And my boss, like, I would literally never forget the conversation with my boss. I had put together this like amazing presentation, if you ask me. It was amazing. And it was on like, I think when I had started at Gucci, they had just had like a blackface incident. And one of the key markets impacted was Atlanta. And like I said, I'm from Atlanta, whatever. So I put together this presentation on like how to like get the client back in Atlanta, and like all this stuff we should do. And my boss was like, thank you. And I was like, yeah, you're welcome. This is good. I was like, this is great. Like, really top tier work. Like, here you go. And he was like, so like, what about those reports that like I was asking for like all this time ago? And I was like, oh yeah, like I'll do that in like 2 seconds. And I just remember he like sat me down and he was like, okay, like I love that you're passionate about this, but like we need to stay on topic here, and especially at the entry level. I think like being, and what I tell people now who like work on our team and stuff, which is like I guess hypocritical, but I'm always like, if you can be the best at what you were hired to do, then you'll be able to like shine.
You'll go up faster.
Exactly. And it's like just kind of like relax a little bit and focus a bit more, especially when you're just starting. It's like you might be feel like belittled a little bit, some of the things you're doing. You might feel like in your internship, like you obviously never want to be have an inappropriate level of like condescending tone, but I think at the end of the day, it's like do what you're hired to do and do it better than anyone else. And then if you feel like you're still not getting the representation or the rapport that you need, then it's like, take the steps necessary. But until then, give it some time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. What do you hate about the fashion industry?
Oh, what do I hate about the fashion industry? I think the exclusivity, which is ironic because they were fictional, but I think that I do think that again, we haven't found a way to have luxury and exclusivity not be linked, right? Like in America, in the world, luxury and exclusivity like are one and the same, right? Like it's not considered luxury if everyone has it. And like really upsets me, like at its core. Like, and I want to figure out a way to break that, because I think that, again, it's like then you make it accessible, you make it cheaper, and then it's not luxury. So I think that, you know, I've become a product snob where I'm like, I look so closely at the details of everything. One of my internships was at the Row, and that was like the highest quality product I've ever seen. I was an intern sitting in the closet with all of the clothes around me, but that's for another story. And literally this like really expensive like leather and all of this stuff, and now I'm like, okay, no, like I get it. Like I'm like, it's more expensive because it's better. But then I'm also like, help, I can't afford it. Like, you know what I mean? So I don't know. That's kind of like my biggest gripe with the industry right now, is just kind of like things are only getting more and more expensive, and it's outpacing the quality. Don't get me wrong. Like
Right.
the prices are going up faster than the quality, but you're also working in the industry. You see that you're losing labor, right? So like the people making these luxury items are dying. Like they're literally old grandma and grandpas like working in these factories, and no one else wants to do it. Like the kids in Italy no longer aspire to work in a factory their whole life. But we in America want things to be made in Italy. Like, I don't know how long that's going to be able to happen. So, you know, I think yeah, so I think that just like kind of figuring out the direction of quality products to like making them more accessible, I think is like my interest.
Great.
We'll see.
Yeah, no, I like that answer. It sort of answers my last question I think you had throughout, which is the biggest macro trends in the industry. So with that, I want to turn it over to the students to see what questions they have there. Good job.
Hi, thanks for coming. I find it like so impressive that you've worked at all these companies, and that's like, I really aspire to work in the designer market. So just like, do you have like one big piece of advice for someone who would want to work in the designer market? And you know, no matter, I know you're buying and I'm studying design, but you know, just in general, I think that it goes hand in hand. So.
It definitely does, and I work with a lot of people who are design majors, and that definitely is an asset, even no matter what job you're going into, because you'll be able to speak to the product better than anyone else. But I do think that when you're talking about luxury, you know, in particular, confidence and your ability to speak to the greater market is like the number one thing that they look for, right? They're always like, do you understand the market? And meaning like the competitive landscape of that brand. And that's how you end up with a lot of people with the exact same background, because the easiest way to understand the market is to be the consumer, right? So the easiest way to know a ton about Chanel is if you grew up wearing it, right? So that's how you end up with a lot of people who grew up wearing it, because then, you know, they get the customer. Like that is part of our job. Like that's a skill. Okay, but you don't have to have done that. And it's like, if you didn't do that, being able to match that level of enthusiasm is kind of where you have to bring it. You have to be able to speak to the designer of that runway show that your mom didn't love. You know what I mean? Like, so I think that's kind of like the main thing that'll take you from a normal company to luxury, is romancing the market.
Thank you.
Thank you, by the way. You've been working in pretty consistently with the market that you're in, being the luxury market. Would you say it's pretty difficult to move like up and down the market, maybe from the better market, the contemporary market, up to the luxury market, in different levels?
Great question. So I mentioned one of my internships was at Macy's. It was my summer internship after junior year. All of my other ones were in luxury, and I did that one because FIT is like Team Macy's. And I don't know if you guys have gotten the Macy's spiel yet. I got it. Okay. So I got the Macy's spiel and I was wooed. So I went, I did the internship, and they offered me a full-time job after gradually for the following year. And I said yes, I took it. And then I interned right after that. I interned at Prada, and then I interned at Saint Laurent, and I was like, wait a second. And but I already had the job, and I was really excited, and I was like, great. Then that whole story happened, and then within a month of graduating, I got offered the job at Gucci, and everything kind of went a different way. But I was about to do that, and one of the main things I was talking to my mentors about, my teachers, was is this going to limit me? And I think that the answer was pretty consistent, that it's obviously easier if you start in luxury, you know, or if you start in contemporary or something and go to luxury. It's harder to go from mass or like off price to luxury. But if you are going to do that, the volume of the company is what bridges the gap. So like I said, when I was at Macy's, do you know how many people I told that cashmere sweaters was $300 million annual business? I mean, it was the first thing I said. Like I would say, if I went to an interview at Prada, I was like, by the way, it was $300 million. Because it's, I mean, at Macy's, because the size of the business at the end of the day, a job is a job. Yes, like I now have fancier product that I'm working with, but my job is to be profitable, like to make the company profitable. So if you're thinking about like just getting experience, like get the experience. It's better to have some experience than to wait for like a luxury experience. And if you're gonna get experience not in whatever sector you wanna be in, try to go for the biggest company that you can. So even if it's off price, like don't work at like the random discount vintage store like on the corner, like go for like Ross or something, you know what I mean? Like, or if you're gonna be in contemporary, try not to be at like, you know, a really small store. Maybe try to go like Theory or like another store, like a bigger company, just because the amount of volume that you're managing or that you're making as the designer, like that's gonna be what bridges the gap between sectors. And speak to that and put it on your resume.
Thank you.
My questions? I actually had a couple questions. So how hard would you say, or like is it common for people to jump between like sectors inside the company? Like I know that you like started in buying, but if you were to say that like, okay, after the first year of buying, I'm like not feeling this like community, could I like switch over to like PR, like merchandising or something? I don't know.
Yeah, I would say definitely certain transitions are more common than others. And so like school is really the best time to kind of like try out completely different areas, right? Like design versus business or something. But like PR, merchandising, marketing, business strategy, like all of those are very closely related. And you can definitely transition. I mean, like anything, not transitioning is easier than transitioning. So like if you know what you want to do earlier, the better. But usually within most companies, after like a year or two, you can kind of go into like an internal track where you can be eligible for roles internally. And that's easier not in luxury than in luxury, but even within like Chanel, for example, we have a lot of people who have moved from different teams internally, and especially as a way for growth, like later on, you know, changing categories is really popular. Fashion and fragrance are completely separate, so also like people switch between those. Beauty is another one, like if maybe you're now like, well, you're over clothes, you can kind of go and explore like fragrance and beauty is a totally different business model. But yeah, I would say that trying to, while you're in school, figure out like the big ideas that drive you and like skill sets. Talk to as many people as you can, like to understand what they do. If you're curious when you see a job posting, like what that is, look up other people who do it and reach out to them and see if you can ask them like what they do. And if you don't like the answer, like keep asking. So that way you have a better idea. But you definitely aren't like locked in. That's okay.
What else? Okay.
I just when you applied and interviewed for all these different other companies, how did each company pick your previous experiences as a competitor?
Like how did they like it? They loved it. I think that the idea, right, is like insider knowledge of competitors. That's typically why there's also not that much different between the jobs at each of those companies. That's why they like similar experiences. Yes, it's because they know that like another company already vetted you. It's lazy, right? Like they're like, okay, that company hired you, like you're probably sufficient.
You're good enough for them, you're good
Yeah,
enough for us.
exactly.
Yeah.
But also it's like you know how to do the exact job you're about to do, right? So it's less work. And that's why luxury internships are more competitive, because there are people who already worked at a luxury firm and they know exactly how to do the exact job that this new company is hiring for. So instead of having to train someone who didn't know how to do it, like now they've just plucked you from someone else who trained you. Doesn't mean that you can't do it if you don't have the same experience. It just means you're gonna have to overcompensate in a different way. And so definitely there's never like, if you're like, I have a favorite brand, like I don't wanna work for a different one, that's like the opposite mentality. Usually it's like, if you wanna work for one brand, working for the competitor, they'll like poach you right away. And that's, starting from Gucci, I didn't apply for Dior or Chanel. They reached out to me because it's like they saw the experience and literally like reached out to me on LinkedIn for both jobs.
I will say, you know, you were talking about the volume before too, and one thing that can be kind of tricky is Macy's, for instance, sells to almost everyone. And a lot of these big department stores, if you go to work for them, they have gentlemen's agreements with a lot of their big brands that they won't poach their employees. So in your case, if you've gone to work at Macy's, you might have gotten really stuck at department stores because none of the brands would be willing to ruffle the feathers of Macy's or then Saks or then Bloomingdale's or what have you. And that may be like getting a little bit
It's so
looser,
true though.
But
Totally true, good point. There's usually a time frame between when you work for one competitor to go to another one. Yeah, that's what I'll say about that.
yeah. Be
But-
careful like when you're
Yeah.
looking to take the job, and make sure that you're aware of any competitive issues that maybe make you sign a meeting.
It definitely never happens with internships or entry level, like never, like it's not allowed. So don't worry about it with internships. It would be like if you're taking a job out of college, rarely is the entry level. Usually it's like, how much information are you privy to? Can you then take it and go to the other company? So the company who cares is always the company you're leaving, not the company you're going to, right? Like it's always like the new company is gonna love that you're coming with information. The old company is gonna be like, wait, like don't take it.
Yeah.
So that only matters if you're privy to any information, which you won't be as an intern or as an entry level employee. So like I have a lot of mentors who they've had to wait to start at a competitor, but it usually doesn't happen like lower down.
I just remembered my question. I was like, what is your work-life balance like? Because I remember you saying that you were like a party girl, and right now you're like dying in design.
Oh
So
yeah.
I was like wondering what it's like to like a typical day or week.
Yeah. So work-life balance varies so much based on the company. And I will say that's one of the things that I wish I prioritized earlier is understanding how big that variance is and how big that impacts your life. I mean, I remember in college all the design students were like down real bad and the fashion business students were like thriving. And I remember there's a very clear difference. Now, it's kind of the same when you think of like luxury versus other things. Like we're down bad and the off-price girls are partying. Okay? They are outside, okay? And the luxury girls are inside working, okay? But I think that, again, it speaks to like what matters to you, and it is very different in each company. Chanel does not make me say they are literally the best place I've ever worked in life. Like I don't ever want to leave. Everyone has kids and everyone is like really about work-life balance. I've never worked anywhere like that. We'll just leave it at that. But everywhere else I worked was very different and in different ways. But I think that like work-life balance can be very minimal at a lot of companies, especially at the entry level, with the idea of being that it gets a little bit better. But I will say that like in buying, typically it's consistent even when you rise, like the amount of work you're doing. So I will always say, look to the person hiring you, like what's their life like, and ask them. mid-30s, probably texting me at 2 a.m. I don't want to be you. So why would I want to be me? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to. So it's like you kind of want to like look at the lifestyle of your next step, and if that's reflective of like what you want, then great. Obviously, you're gonna have to do work at some point, so you make sacrifices. But if that's a priority to you, like look at the role above you and see if there's a light at the end of the tunnel. I hope that's helpful.
Any other questions? Well, thank you so much. This is super helpful. Great
Follow me on LinkedIn, and like if you guys have any questions or anything that you think of later, you can always message me, or I can just give you guys my email too.
That's great. Yeah.